There are people who don't come into your life with violence. Enter with a test, a delay without warning, a joke that diminishes you, an interruption when you are speaking, an uncomfortable request made with a smile on your face. And what decides the rest of the story is often not the size of the aggression. That's what you do in the first minute. Because when you accept a little disrespect to avoid conflict, to appear polite, to avoid creating a climate, someone on the other side may be learning something dangerous about you, how far you can go. And that's what this video is about small signs that seem silly, but that act as half-open doors for manipulative people, about common situations, from work to family, from relationships to friendships, where you think you're being mature, when in fact you're being measured, and mainly about how to realize this early, before wear and tear becomes routine, guilt, confusion, and silence. Because understanding this mechanism changes the way you read looks, sentences, and attitudes. Change the way you protect yourself. It even changes the way you see yourself. Now think honestly. How many times have you swallowed something that bothered you at the time, but you called it a detail? How many times have you laughed without finding it funny so as not to seem too sensitive? How many times have you missed an invasion because you were too tired to explain the obvious? Maybe you are experiencing exactly this right now. Maybe there is someone in your life doing little things that don't seem serious in isolation, but that, together, leave a strange air, a weight difficult to name, as if, around this person, you needed to adjust all the time. This is where a lot of people get confused, because the manipulator rarely starts big. It starts small enough to make you doubt your own perception, small enough that it seems like overreacting, small enough that if you complain, the blame still falls on you. Wow, it was just a joke. Did you take it to that side? What drama? And at that moment, something decisive happens. It is no longer just about disrespect. It's about who will define reality from now on. You've seen this happen. Sometimes the boss who tests your time, sometimes in the partner who crosses your limits and then calls it love, sometimes the friend who always exposes you but hides it with intimacy. At first it seems bearable, then it becomes standard, and when it becomes a pattern, you are no longer just tolerating behaviors. You're teaching people to read you as someone who is trainable. And this is scary because it touches on a silent point in adult life. Many good people were taught not to bother, giving in, to be highlighted, keeping the peace. However, social predators recognize this pattern with impressive speed. They observe what embarrasses you, what silences you, what makes you retreat. Observe, test, repeat. And when they realize that you prefer to adapt rather than confront, they move forward. So stay with me until the end, because today you will understand why these details are never that small, how this game begins in the most banal everyday life, and at what moment your kindness stops being a virtue and becomes an invitation. And as you listen, notice. Who exactly in your life always seems to push an extra inch? There is a pattern that almost no one notices at first. It's not an attack. It's not a direct conflict. It's a test. Cold, calculated, silent. Manipulators do not arrive by imposing dominance. They arrive collecting data. And the first thing they want is simple. Do you react? Or do you absorb? Because before any control comes reading. And this reading happens in things so small that they go unnoticed. A lightly ignored limit. An out-of-time comment. An inconvenient request made at the wrong time. It's not about the act itself. It's about what comes after it. Your behavior. If you correct it, resistance is observed. If you hesitate, openness is observed. If you accept, access is observed. And here's the thing that a lot of people don't want to face. This is rarely unconscious. Some people study you without you realizing it. They pay attention to your response time, your tone of voice, your need for approval, your discomfort with conflict. They notice if you justify too much, if you apologize too quickly, if you try to maintain harmony even when something is clearly wrong. And the more you try to appear easy to get along with, the more you will be classified as someone who is easy to get along with. Now let me ask you something, and answer honestly. When someone slightly exceeds your limit, do you usually correct it immediately? Or do you wait for it to pass and see if it happens again? Because this interval, this silence, is gold for those who manipulate. It is in this space that the person understands that they can try again, just a little more invasive, a little more direct, and again, all in small doses, because the goal is never to scare you. It's you get used to, and when you get used to it, you stop questioning. There is a psychological mechanism here that is uncomfortable to accept. The manipulator does not need to dominate you by force. He needs you to cooperate without realizing it. And this collaboration always starts like this, with small concessions that seem harmless. You release it once, then reveal two. Afterwards, it doesn't seem so wrong anymore. And without realizing it, you are already participating in your own conditioning. Now change perspective for a second. Imagine that you are observing this situation from the outside, seeing someone constantly being interrupted, having their opinions ignored, being pressured to accept things they didn't want. From the outside, of course. It goes without saying. It's even uncomfortable to watch, but when it's with you, it gets confusing. Because there is a bond, there is context, there is history, and above all, there is an internal narrative trying to smooth everything over. It wasn't bad. Maybe I'm exaggerating. It's not worth creating a problem. And it is exactly this narrative that the manipulator relies on, because while you try to understand, he already understands you. And here's a game-changing micro-revelation. Manipulators don't respect how you feel. They respect what you impose. Feel the weight of it. It's not about intention. It's about perceived limit. And from the moment someone realizes that your limits are too flexible, too negotiable, too postponable, you stop being just someone kind. You become predictable. Now comes the most uncomfortable part of all. It's not about what they do to you. It's about what you do when that happens. Because there is a silent mistake that most people make and repeat, and then don't understand why certain relationships start to hurt. You try to be understanding when you should be clear. You try to be patient when you should be firm. Try to keep the peace, even when something inside you has already conflicted. And that seems like virtue. It feels like maturity. It feels like emotional control. But in many cases, it's just fear disguised as politeness. For a second. How many times have you noticed something wrong immediately, but chose not to react right away? How many times have you thought, I'll talk later, and that later never came? How many times have you adjusted your behavior so as not to upset someone who clearly wasn't worried about annoying you? There's something going on there, and it's not small. There is a very subtle line between being a balanced person and being a person who cancels himself to maintain balance with those who have no limits at all. And the manipulator realizes this. He notices when you swallow words, when you laugh to avoid tension, when you change the subject so as not to take a stance, when you accept something just so it doesn't seem difficult. And at that moment, without you realizing it, a conclusion begins to form in his mind. You don't protect your own space. And when someone doesn't protect their own space, someone else takes it. Just like that. And here is the phrase that many people avoid facing. You taught how you want to be treated, not with words, with omissions. And this is not about guilt, it's about awareness. Because no one wakes up thinking, I'm going to allow disrespect today. This happens in micro decisions, small choices where you prioritize momentary comfort over clarity, where you exchange quick discomfort for prolonged wear. And little by little, you mold yourself to the environment, without realizing that the environment is also being shaped based on what you tolerate. Now let me tease you in a more direct way. Do you have difficulty saying no without explaining too much? Do you feel the need to justify obvious limits? Do you keep revisiting situations in your head, thinking about what you should have said after it has already happened? If the answer is yes, then you are not alone in this. Many people here have gone through, or still go through, exactly this type of silent situation, where nothing is explicit, but everything weighs heavily. And this is where the confusion increases, Because you can't point out a big mistake, just an accumulation of little things, small concessions, minor inconveniences ignored, until one day you realize that you're no longer comfortable. But you also don't know exactly where you started. And this happens because error never feels like error at first. He looks mature. It feels like control. It seems like let it go. But in practice, this is how you open space, inch by inch, for someone to test, advance, and eventually overtake. No resistance, no confrontation, no warning. There is a point here that is not about opinion. It's about brain function. When someone interacts with you, their brain is constantly trying to answer a silent question. What level of resistance will I encounter here? It's not something conscious most of the time. It's automatic, fast, almost instinctive. And do you know what defines this answer? Standard. The human brain learns through repetition. He doesn't analyze every situation from scratch. It observes behavior, identifies consistency, and creates shortcuts. These shortcuts save energy, but they also distort how you are perceived. Now pay attention to this. If you accept a little disrespect today, and tomorrow, and then, the other person's brain doesn't interpret that as continued kindness. He interprets it as the absence of a barrier, and the absence of a barrier for a manipulative profile is not a neutral detail. It's a green light. There is a concept in social psychology called behavioral reinforcement. When a behavior does not encounter negative consequences, it tends to repeat itself and often intensify. This doesn't just apply to the laboratory, it applies to human relationships every day. So when someone crosses your limit and nothing happens, something happens. The behavior is validated. And here comes the fact that few people consider. The brain doesn't differentiate very well between there was no reaction and this is allowed. For him, consistent silence becomes implicit authorization. Feel the weight of that for a second. Not reacting also communicates. Now let me ask you an uncomfortable question. How many messages do you think you have sent without saying a single word? Because every time you ignore a nuisance, you are teaching something about yourself. Every time you adapt without need, you are recalibrating the other person's perception of your value, your limit, your space. And it doesn't stay static. The brain adjusts. He begins to predict your behavior, start anticipating that you will give in, that you will avoid confrontation, that you will absorb. And when that becomes an expectation, you stop being seen as someone who can react. You become seen as someone who probably won't. Do you notice the difference? It's not about who you are inside. It's about the standard you demonstrate on the outside. And manipulators work exactly at this level. They do not depend on your essence. They depend on your predictability. Because predictability is advanced control. Now change the angle for a moment. Imagine two scenarios. In the first, someone makes an invasive comment and receives a clear, direct, non-aggressive, but firm response. The atmosphere becomes slightly tense and stops there. In the second, someone makes the same comment and receives an uncomfortable smile, an attempt to soften, perhaps even a justification. Which of these two brains learns faster as far as it can go? The answer is obvious, and this is where a lot of people make the mistake of thinking they are avoiding problems, when, in fact, they are training others. Because the other person's brain is not analyzing your intention, it is recording your pattern. And pattern, once identified, it becomes an easy path. The problem never starts big. It grows, and it grows so gradually that you don't realize when it stops being something isolated and becomes a pattern. At first, it's just a detail out of place, a cross comment, a slightly invasive attitude, something that bothers you, but not enough for you to stop everything and confront it. Then you release it, but it doesn't stop there. Next time, the person goes a little further, not a lot, just enough to test again. And if nothing changes, she learns. And here's the thing that almost no one realizes. Disrespect doesn't increase all at once. It scales in millimeters. Millimeters are difficult to perceive. You accept an interruption, then accept a decision made without you, then accept a harsher tone, then you accept a charge that doesn't make sense. And when you realize you're already dealing with something that, in the beginning, you would never accept. But now, it seems too late to react. Because there is history, there is repetition. There is a strange feeling that if you take a stance now, you will appear incoherent, as if he had allowed everything up until now, and only now decided to change. And deep down, this stops a lot of people. Now do a quick exercise with me. Imagine that you are watching your own life from the outside, as an observer, without justifying anyone, without softening anything, just looking at the facts. Would you see small invasions being repeated? Would you see times when you were clearly uncomfortable, but quiet? Would you see someone taking up more space than they should, while you reduce yours? From the outside, it's clear. But inside, it gets emotional. Because inside, there is attachment, there is history, there is the constant attempt to keep the relationship working. And that's exactly what keeps the cycle active. You try to balance something that is already out of balance, and while you try to adjust, the other keeps expanding. No rush, no guilt, non-stop. Now comes a twist that changes everything. Manipulators don't need to pressure you directly when you're already self-adjusting. They notice when you start anticipating reactions, when you think twice before speaking, when you mince words to avoid conflict, when you adapt before anyone even asks you to. And at that moment, control is no longer external. He became an intern. For a second and feel it. You start to police yourself, start avoiding certain topics, start editing who you are, and all this without anyone needing to explicitly demand it. This is the point where disrespect stops being behavior and becomes an environment. An environment where you walk carefully. Where do you calculate? Where you feel like you need to keep something under control, even though you don't know exactly what. And the most dangerous thing of all, it's just that on the outside it may seem normal, but inside, you've already started to disappear. There is a specific moment when something changes, and almost no one notices when it happens. It's not the first disrespect, not even in the second. It's later, after you have already started to adapt, because from that point on, the relationship stops being about what the other does and becomes about what you avoid doing. And that changes everything. Before, you reacted internally. I felt uncomfortable. I questioned. I noticed. Now, you anticipate. You already enter situations trying not to generate friction. You already choose words with excessive care. Already measure the tone. Already calculate possible reactions. Without realizing it, you start to live according to others. Now answer me honestly. Have you ever entered a conversation thinking more about not annoying than about being truthful? If so, stop for a second. Because this is the critical point. This is where many people miss something essential without realizing it. Emotional autonomy. When you start to organize your behavior based on someone's possible reaction, you gradually give up control of your own expression. And the subtlest thing about this is that it feels like a choice. But it's not entirely. It is conditioned adaptation. Your brain begins to associate confrontation with prolonged discomfort, tension, exhaustion. So he tries to protect you. He looks for shortcuts. It leads you to avoid. Avoid talking. Avoid disagreeing. Avoid positioning yourself. And the more you avoid it, the more this response strengthens. Now comes the question that bothers you. At what point did you start to silence yourself to maintain a relationship? Maybe you didn't notice. Maybe it was gradual. Small adjustments here, small concessions there. Until, one day, you realize that you are different. More restrained, more careful, more reduced. And the other one? The other is more comfortable than ever. Because now there is no real resistance anymore. There is behavior management. You adapt before something happens. You shape yourself before there is conflict. You avoid it before you even test it. And this creates a dangerous illusion that everything is under control. But it isn't, because control presupposes conscious choice. And what's happening here is automatic response. Now change the angle once again. If someone looked at your posture today, compared to when this relationship started, would you see a difference? Would you see yourself freer, or more restrained, more spontaneous, or more calculated, more you, or more adapted? This comparison reveals much more than any direct discussion, because the clearest sign that you've lost space is not what the other person does. It's how much you stopped being. And here comes a silent but brutal detail. Manipulators don't need to completely dominate you. They just need to reduce their margin of action. And when that margin shrinks enough, you're still there. Gift, working. But internally, you are no longer in control like you used to be. But there is a possible break, and it doesn't start where most people imagine. It doesn't start with confrontation. It doesn't start with strong speech. It doesn't even start with the other. It starts with an almost imperceptible, but extremely powerful internal decision. Stop negotiating what you already know disrespects you. It seems simple. It is not. Because up until now you have been adjusting. It was giving in details. It was creating justifications to maintain stability. So when the idea of changing comes up, the discomfort comes strong, and that is confusing. Many people interpret this discomfort as a sign that they are overdoing it, but it isn't. It's just breaking out of a pattern that has become accustomed to existing like this. Now pay attention to this. The first real move is not to talk. It is internally maintaining that something is no longer happening, without explaining it to anyone, without rehearsing justifications, without preparing the ground. It just doesn't happen anymore. And this type of decision completely changes your stance, even before you say anything. His look changes. Your response time changes. Your energy changes. And this is noticed. Because remember, the other's brain reads pattern. When the pattern changes, something breaks. Now let me ask you a direct question. Can you maintain a limit even at the risk of generating discomfort? If the answer is, I don't know, that's okay. Because this is the most honest part of the process. You don't need to turn into someone aggressive. You don't need to react harshly. You don't need to prove anything to anyone. But you need to stop softening what disorganizes you inside. There is a huge difference between being a calm person and being a person who betrays himself to maintain peace of mind around. And this difference begins to appear in micro-decisions. A no said without long justification. A silence that doesn't try to please. A pause before accepting something you don't want. Small changes, but with a huge impact. Now comes a contrast that many people don't expect. At first, when you start to really take a stand, it may seem like things get worse. People test more, provoke more, try to return to the old pattern, and that doesn't mean you're wrong. It means the game has changed. You stopped being predictable, and this bothers those who depended on this predictability to move forward. So keep this in mind clearly. Resistance at the beginning is not a sign of error. It is a sign of dynamic adjustment. And here comes something essential for anyone listening to this now. You are not the only one going through this type of internal reconstruction. Many people here have already realized that they spent too much time molding themselves to fit into relationships that never respected the real space they had. And getting out of this is not about external force. It's about internal coherence. Because in the end, limit is not what you say it is. It's what you sustain, even when no one is comfortable with it. There is one last thing that almost no one talks about, because it takes away any comfortable excuse. The biggest risk has never been encountering manipulative people. It was not realizing the exact moment you started to adapt to them. Because from that point on, the problem stops being external. It becomes an internal standard. And internal standards are silent. They don't scream. They don't warn. They just repeat themselves. And when you don't stop that, you start to carry the same behavior into other relationships, other environments, other people, as if it were normal to adjust, give in, soften, always. Now let me ask you a question that might be on your mind after this video ends. How many versions of you have been molded to fit into places that never truly respected you? Think about it calmly, because it's not just about one person. It's about a way of positioning yourself in the world. And here comes the final twist. Many people think that the danger lies in the experienced, cold, calculating manipulator, but these are visible over time. The real risk is in small, repeated, almost invisible situations, where you adjust without realizing it, because that's where the pattern is born. And what is born small grows in silence. Now for a second. If someone came into your life today and did exactly the same tests that you have experienced before, would you react differently? Or would you automatically repeat the same script? This answer defines your future more than any analysis of the other. Because in the end, manipulators are not rare. But people who position themselves clearly from the beginning are. And this completely changes the type of relationship that remains. Now, if this content made you see situations that previously seemed confusing, then keep this with you. Perception without action becomes frustration. There is no point in seeing and continuing to allow it. And I want to hear you here. At what point in your life did you realize, or are you realizing now, that you accepted too many small things? Write this down, because when you put it into words, you start to break the pattern. And maybe someone who reads your comment will recognize it and wake up too. If this made sense to you, share this content with someone who keeps swallowing things they shouldn't. Sometimes a simple realization comes before a bigger problem. And pay attention in the coming days, in the details, in small tests, in those moments when something seems silly, but it bothers you. That's where it all starts, and that's where it all ends too. Because in the end, the limit you don't set, someone learns to cross.